Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to this final lecture of our Great Books series for 2024. As we conclude with Dr. Fischer, and who is one of the world's leading experts on Hermann Hesse, who is talking about his fairy tales and the way that Hesse both innovated, but in some ways reinvented the German and the Central European fairy tales. And Max is going to be here in a moment. So I want to welcome you. And I want to say for all you students out there that the syllabus for 2025 is already up. So if you want to register for 2025, those of you who are students and taking it for credit, or those of you who are just auditing, not for credit, it's up on the Ubiquity website. And maybe when Max comes on, I can put the link in the chat box. But that's going to be up. It's another fascinating list of 6 books. We're going to start with The Secret of the Golden Flower, which was written, according to legend, by the teacher of Lao Tzu, who wrote the Tao Te Ching, which is one of the most famous religious and spiritual texts in history. And this was The Secret of the Golden Flower was written by his teacher. And so I'll be lecturing on that in January and February, and then the year would unfold from there. And then I want to draw to everybody's attention a very, very important course for all of humanity to take. And that's on January 15th to 19th. We're going to be learning remote viewing with a view of developing the capacities to have intelligible communications with the ETs. I can't think of anything more important in the world right now than for human beings, meaning all of us. I'm taking the whole week off to take the course. It's from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock for 5 days Pacific time. And if you can't take it live, you can take it partly live and then look at the recording later. It works most effectively if you can join live. It'll be online. But if you can't, because you work or for whatever reasons, you can always watch the recordings the next day or later on in the day or whatever. But learning how to communicate with the extraterrestrials is just it's what's up for humanity, because we all need to learn the mother tongue. I also want to let people know that our Chartres 2025 pilgrimage is now online. For those of you who may not know about that, that's the Sacred Heart of Ubiquity University and our Wisdom School, the annual pilgrimage to Chartres. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And so we have a lot in store. I'll put both links up. Actually, all 3, the great books and the ET remote viewing and Chartres when Ludwig comes in and starts his lecture. He said he would be a few minutes late. So it's been a good year, 2024. It's been a very eventful year. We now have a different world coming with Donald Trump ascending to the White House and the Oval Office once again. Ludwig.
Hello,
hey.
Jim.
How you doing, my friend?
So, part 2 of talking about Hesse's fairy tales.
Part 2. Well, listen, I know you're ready to go, so I'll turn the program over to you. And then Ludwig, is going to make his presentation, and then when he finishes, I'll come back in and then we'll dialogue and take your questions. I want all the students to ask questions of probably the world's leading specialist in the literature of Hermann Hesse. So this is a real treat, everyone. So Ludwig, I turn the program over to you.
Well, I will do my best to live up to your expectations. So, the second part of talking about Hermann Hesse's fairy tales. In the first part, I focused on the context, and I promised that in this session, I will be more focusing on particular fairy tales. And I mentioned last time that it will be the dwarf, which is the very first fairy tale in the book. This is my dog Elvis, who responds to somewhat an unexpected morning. Elvis, be quiet. So, no, you know, animals play a very important part, particularly in the dwarf. And you know what happens when you don't respond and listen to the dog. So those of you who have read the fairy tale The Dwarf know what I'm talking about. But today, actually, I want to say a few words about the effect that fairy tales have on the arts, and in particular music. So we have Engelbert Humperdinck, Hansel and Gretel. We have Ravel, Mother Goose. We have Tchaikovsky, Sleeping Beauty. We have Rimsky-Korsakov and Bartok and a number of other composers. And then painters play a big role, actually, in the story of Iris. And I have an Iris today with me, and because he plays a crucial role in that last story. So I want to give a little bit more voice to Jack Sipes, who was a former colleague of mine at the University of Minnesota. And his comments, and I do think he's one of the, if not the most important scholar in contemporary academic, and not only academic, discussion. And in his book, which I strongly recommend, Why Fairy Tales Stick, he says on page 152, if you want to get that book and read it, I think it is an excellent book. At their best, folk tales, fairy tales, and fantasy literature represent metaphorically the opportunities for human advancement and the conflicts that arise when we fail to establish codes commensurate with the self-interests of large groups within the human population. I'm immediately reminded here actually of Jim Morrison's talk on Eric Hoffer. This is when revolutions are being started, actually. So fairy tales hint of happiness, Jack Sipes says. This hint, what Ernst Bloch, a very important German philosopher, my quote again a little bit later, has called the anticipatory illumination. The anticipatory illumination, very important concept, has constituted their utopian appeal, which has a strong moral component to it. So Jack Sipes has a very low opinion on what I would call the market of fairy tales as it is presented in through Hollywood. And I mentioned that in session number 1, that there are billions of dollars, and I mean billions, not millions, made with presenting film versions of fairy tales. So the Brothers Grimm really are actually had a tapped into a enormous gold mine. But this worldwide market, Jack Sipes calls, and he has about 10 adjectives here: banal, tedious, artificial, pernicious, sentimental, nauseating, fallacious, stupid, stereotypical, saccharine, putrid, ignorant, and redundant. Now, is he talking about Barbie, Lion King, and Shrek, and so on? Well, just to mention here a little bit how to succeed on a market, we might make a brief reference here to Disney. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, 1937, Cinderella, 1950. Oh, actually, Cinderella could, could talk another hour and a half about just film versions of Cinderella. Sleeping Beauty, 1959, The Little Mermaid, 1989, The Beauty and the Beast, 1991, and so on, The Princess and the Frog. Now, the critique that Jack Sipes has here, besides thinking they are sort of a very low form of presentation, these films, he says, follow conventional principles of technical and aesthetic organization to celebrate stereotypical gender and power relations and to foster a worldview of harmony. The images, words, music, and movement lead to a totalizing spectacle that basically glorifies how technology can be used to aestheticize social and political relations according to the dominant mode of production and ruling groups. In that regard, I will have to say a lot more what that means in the age of AI, just in case someone is not quite clear of what these abbreviations stand for. They actually stand for arrogant ignorance and for airborne Icarus, who doesn't know yet that he took off into a flight into the unlimited numbers of data that automatically is converted into meaningful information, knowledge, and then ultimately wisdom. Well, there are some critics now, cultural critics, and people who are quite aware and concerned of what's really going on here. I will say a little bit more about that later. Jack Sipes, one more time about fairy tales, says they can harbor and cultivate the germs of subversion and offer people hope in their resistance to all forms of oppression and in their pursuit of more meaningful modes of life and communication. Now, the highly esteemed German philosopher, cultural critic, literary critic that I just mentioned, Walter Benjamin, wrote an essay, article in 1934, 90 years ago, called The Storyteller. And this is a sentence that I actually would like to talk about for at least a full session, because it is already showing an awareness of what the issues are as we are giving up on what I call the living word. So Walter Benjamin says, the struggle for the survival of imaginative vision, the survival of imaginative vision in children and adults. It depends on the cultivation of original cultural traditions. The cultivation of original cultural traditions. Now that's very different from the recombining and external storage machines, so-called bits of information. It depends on the cultivation of original cultural traditions. continuously renewed through the living word, exchanged person to person in a direct communication. Now, this sentence needs to be put in context with social media, with texting, with what's going on right now in the erosion of meaning and language through indirect and an unecological imbalance of how direct communication is replaced through indirect technological means. And of course, here it would be very important to speak about Jacques Ellul and the humiliation of the word. I mentioned that in session number 1. So Walter Benjamin, also one more quote from him: "The wisest thing, so the fairy tale taught mankind in olden times and teaches children to this day, is to meet at the forces of the mythical world with cunning and with high spirits." So there is a different kind of ethics, actually, that is not just Christian in fairy tales. It's also the hero in the fairy tales is allowed to be a trickster. And of course, you have the trickster as a very important person in traditional storytelling, in many, many traditions, thinking here particularly of the Native American traditions. I do want to mention here Vladimir Prop, a very important researcher in the area of folk tales. 1928 already, he writes this Morphology of Folktale. I'm dealing here with a translation in 1968. And he found 31 basic patterns and functions that we can, versions that you can have, that you can classify, fairy tales and folk tales. So, and I like to actually at least draw very briefly attention what this means in the context of the work of Bert Hellinger and the role of the absent, denied, or excluded family member in the future, in the story that a family lives over generations. So most fairy tales, or the vast majority, they start with one member of the family absents himself from home. He or she, they migrate to another place because the conditions are very difficult in where they are originally located. So then the hero is tested, and then the hero acquires the use of a magical agent. We have that in the dwarf with a magic potion. Then the villain, which is here the suitor of the wonderful, beautiful lady, is punished, and then the hero is married and ascends to the throne. Of course, we are reminded here of Joseph Campbell and the hero with 1,000 faces, and that pattern. So fairy tales have been criticized because of their patriarchal Christian ideology. I have actually a quote by Roland Barthes that they need to be demythologized. They need to be rewritten from a feminist perspective. There's a book that retells Grimm fairy tales from a gay perspective. So, but what happens is that somehow these more adjusted to our modern times, I do call that not modern with an O, but with an A, they don't seem to stick necessarily. Somehow they have survival built in to traditional fairy tale. And that hero in these fairy tales, as I said, does not need to be just good. He has to be also clever. I wanted to give at least two leading books. If someone wants to get a good summary about the scholarship and a history, my recommendation is that you read Andrew Teverson Fairy Tale, which is in Routledge, New York, 2013, or you start your further exploration of fairy tales with a book by Jack Sipes, Why Fairy Tales Stick, also in Routledge in New York, 2006. So then the major scholars that I at least want to mention here in the 20th century that I think really are, there are many of them, but I want to mention four here. Max Lüthi, Lutz Röhrig, actually whom I knew personally, German researcher, Marie-Louise von Franz, who wrote a whole book about basically the prince, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. It is actually the third most read book after the Bible and the Quran of all books of all times. And then I think Harvard scholar Maria Tatar has a beautiful, beautiful also bibliophile version of Grimm's fairy tales, Maria Tatar of Harvard. So now let's get into Hermann Hesse a little bit more directly. And I want to actually start showing a picture. And that is sort of a motto that I usually give out when I give a workshop on Hermann Hesse. And it says, the best weapons against the infamous of life are courage, willfulness, and patience. Courage strengthens, willfulness is fun, and patience provides tranquility. So now you are much better equipped if you follow these three Hessian principles in order to survive whatever this modern times presents as challenges to you personally. Now, also, since the book is sort of, I would say, becoming less and less the focus of people's learning, Hesse, I think, defends the books in a number of times. And I have a picture of the older Hesse. And he says, every book is an adventure of the mind and an invitation to experience the gifts of the imagination. An invitation to experience the gifts of the imagination. And I'd like to add one more quick, actually two more quick quotes from Jack Sipes. That fairy tales are survival stories with hope. They alert us to dangerous situations, instruct us, guide us, give us counsel, and reveal what might happen if we take advantage of helpful instruments or agents. And one more last quote here from the book, Why Fairy Tales Stick. If you read it, find that quote on page 42. The truth value of a fairy tale is dependent on the degree to which a writer is capable of using a symbolical linguistic code, narrative strategy, and stereotypical characterization to depict, expose, or celebrate the modes of behavior that were used and justified to attain power in a civilizing process of a given society. Whether oral or literary, the tales have sought to uncover truths about the pleasures and pains of existence, to propose possibilities for adaptation and survival, and to reveal the intricacies of our civilization civilizing process. So I mentioned also in session number 1 that I did a study with actual professional modern storytellers. And I just want to give here a little quote from Laura Sims, who has been one of the leading storytellers, from an article that she wrote called Words in Our Hearts, the Experience of the Story. When a story is told from the heart, she says, it is through communication, natural and straightforward. It becomes living language in which words are intrinsically bound up with spirit and are more than themselves. A story told is a reciprocal event, a poem created in mid-air. The storyteller can transmit not only the content of the story and something of herself, but can pass on the power of the word to inspire the listener in turn to speak from the heart. Actually, I think memorization is quite important. Again, should be that you learn a poem when you memorize it, not by mind. You learn it by heart. So, as Laura Sims says, thus a most ancient ritual is protected. Human communication. So we can participate in one other world, in our world. So, and that word is not an artificial world. That intelligence is not the artificial intelligence. So, and now we're going directly into quotes from Hermann Hesse. This is out of academia. I have no right to call myself, says Hesse, one who knows. I was one who seeks and still am. But I no longer seek in the stars or in books. I'm beginning to hear the teachings of my blood pulsing within me. My story isn't pleasant. It's not sweet and harmonious like the invented story. It tastes of folly and bewilderment, of madness and dream, like the life of all people who no longer want to lie to themselves. Now, some quotes by Hesse, which appear in the other fairy tales. So this one is out of the fairy tale Faldum. You know that it's over 20 in that volume that we have been using. But there are some sentences that are so significant that I do want to give them some room here today. And here he says, and this is again, of course, quoting Hesse, every appearance on earth is a parable, and every parable is an open gate through which the soul, if it is ready, is able to go into the interior of the world, where you and I, and day and night are all one. And I might say this is not the world of the singularity that's supposed to happen in about 5 years. Continue with Hesse. Here and there in this life, the open gate comes into the way of every human being at some time or another. the thought flies to everyone that everything visible is a parable, and that behind the parable dwells the spirit and eternal life. Few, of course, go through the gate and give away the beautiful appearance for the imagined reality of the inside. Now, this quote is from the fairy tale called the Stream Sequence. Once again, out of the dull, hellish smoke, imagery emerged. Once again, a small piece of the dark path was illuminated by the shaping light of memories, and the soul penetrated out of the primeval world into the homely district of time. Now, the word heart, soul, and spirit, these three words, they play a very big role in Hesse's work. I don't think there's any use for those who think in mechanistic, materialistic terms exclusively. Now, upon listening to a song by Hugo Wolf, here the person who is the main character in that fairy tale says, "With that before me and in me the world slid apart, sank in tears and sounds, not to say as poured out, as flowing, as good and painful. Oh, weeping, oh, sweet collapse, blissful melting. All the books in the world full of thoughts and poems are nothing compared to a minute of sobbing when feeling surges in torrents, soul feels and finds itself deeply." And here comes a sentence I want you to take with you. Tears are melting ice of the soul. All angels are close to the weeper. Tears are melting ice of the soul. All angels are close to the weeper. Yes, now in that fairy tale, again, the dream sequence, I want to give you this following quote. "Good intimate darkness, warm cradle of soul and lost homeland opens up. Time of unshaped existence, indecisive first flush above the source ground under which the ancestral prehistory sleeps with a primeval forest dreams." So this is such an important concept, more than a concept in Hesse. What's really being invoked and given presence in these fairy tales, it's not something that anybody who writes them even, that makes a story up. Actually, the writer, when Hesse writes these fairy tales, he attunes to actually a deeper song, a deeper narrative that brings forth the ancestral prehistory. Only feel, it says in the story, soul, only go astray, dig blindly in the lush path of guiltless twilight, drive the eye. I know you, anxious soul, nothing is more necessary to you. Nothing is so much food, so much drink and sleep for you as the homecoming to your beginnings. A wave rushes around you and you are a wave, a forest and you are forest. And there is no more outside and inside. You fly, bird, in airs. You swim, fish in sea. Suck light, are light. Taste dark and are dark. We wander, soul. We swim and fly and smile and re-knot with tender spirit. with tender spirit fingers, the torn threads blissfully sound out again the destroyed vibrations. Those are the G5 vibrations. We no longer seek God. We are God. We are the world. We kill and die with, we create and resurrect with our dreams. Our most beautiful dream, that is the blue sky. Our most beautiful dream, that is the sea. Our most beautiful dream, that is the starry night. We get into that in a moment with Vincent van Gogh, as he should be pronounced, and his painting of Iris, the starry, starry night. And it is the fish and the bright, joyful sound. It is the bright, joyful light. Everything is our dream. Everything is our most beautiful dream. We have just died and have become earth. We just have invented laughter. Just now we have arranged a constellation. Voices resound, and each is the voice of the mother. Trees rustles, and each has rustled above our cradle. Roads diverge in the shape of stars, and each road is the way home. But maybe you have to travel the road less, take the road less traveled. Great book. Poem, Robert Frost. So, as I did in the session last November 13th, literary criticism does not have the ability to get close to the core of the story. And in 1958, 4 years before his death, he answers a reader. Hesse wrote 14,000 letters. Each literary work has above all an aesthetic value, which requires a receptivity. Are we cultivating receptivity? No, we're talking an enormous quantified mass of data to all that is beautiful, as I say. No attempts and effort can turn this receptivity into a science. It cannot be learned and explained through the application of methods. Never forget that the essence and the magic of a literary work cannot be grasped through critical analysis. So, now let's get into the dwarf. And I won't give you a synopsis of the story. It's a story of takes place in northern Italy in the time of the Renaissance. Hesse was extremely familiar with northern Italy. You know, he lived then in Montagnoli in the Italian Sparta, Switzerland. And he actually lets you into the workshop, into the kitchen of storytelling. Here it says in the dwarf, it is a quote from page 4. You must be patient a little while longer. Good stories are like those noble wild animals that make their home in hidden spots. And you must often settle down at the entrance of the caves and woods and lie in wait for them a long time. And the dwarf, you know, the dwarf holds the power in most fairy tales. So Filippo is his name in the story. He had learned the art of storytelling in the Orient, where storytellers are highly regarded. Indeed, they are magicians and play with the souls of their listeners as a child plays with his ball. You know, in the Middle Ages, actually, they were able to do amputations in the legs. And what happened, there was a curtain at that, whatever, let's say, the left leg of that person whose leg has to be amputated. And on the other side was a storyteller. And that was a form of anesthesia. So the person got so into the story that their attention was taken to this other land, to the degree that anything else that was going on in their body, actually, at the time, was not the central focus anymore. Now, on page 5 in the dwarf, it says, the minds of the listeners cannot fly easily on their own power. He, that is Filippo, the storyteller here, he always began with something close and contemporary. Then he led the imagination imperceptibly wherever he wanted. So that's the great art of storytelling. But it takes you to a place, to a country, to a culture, to a memory, to an anticipation of the future that has a not-for-profit destination marked on it. Now, there are many wisdom sentences, pearls of wisdom in each one of these fairy tales. And in a little bit of a moment of resignation, the dwarf says towards the end, wise people serve fools almost everywhere, and that the lives of most people are similar to a bad comedy. Well, my friends, times have changed. Or maybe they haven't. So I'm giving you a picture of Hesse at his desk. That is the old Hesse. And I did get myself a iris, because that next story is about a flower. But the flower is playing a crucial role. It has the power of transformation in it. Now, this is from the fairy tale Iris, written in 1918. Think about that year. And it says in the story Iris, all children, as long as they are still in a mystery, are busy without interruption in the soul, with the only important thing, with themselves and with the mysterious connection of their own person with the world around. Seekers and wise men return to these occupations with the years of maturity, but most people forget and leave this inner world of the truly important forever at an early age and wander around for life in the colorful madness of worries, desires, and goals, none of which dwell in their innermost being, none of which leads them back to their innermost being and home. Now, that Iris story, that Iris fairy tale also shows Hesse. He was an ardent gardener, and the garden and garden metaphors and plant metaphors and symbols play a huge role in many of his writings. And here we have, I think, a key passage that I like to read to you. Now, this is the story Iris is about a boy by the name of Anselm, and he loves flowers. And here is how he perceives the flowers when he is young. Things are very different. I have to say that I just bought these 2 flowers yesterday, and they were $12.99. You know, there is money to be made with flowers, but there are many things different you can do with it. For example, you could educate and transform your own capacity of attention, concentration, and symbol making. So here's the quote from Iris. The boy, Anselm is his name, adored the blue flag or iris more than any other flower, and it became most important to him. It was the symbol, an example of everything worth contemplating and everything that was miraculous. When he looked into its chalice and, steeped in thought, followed that bright, dreamlike path between the marvelous yellow shrubs toward the twilight deep inside the flower, then his soul looked through the gate where appearance becomes an enigma and seeing becomes a presentiment. So right now, actually, we are in our imagination doing a 20-minute meditation where you just look at this flower, sort of in the sense of, you know, Rilke, when Rodin told him when he was restless, didn't have any inspiration, he says, go to the Jardin des Plantes, which was the zoo at the time, and look at the panther until you see it. That's what Rilke did for 3 weeks. So when you look at this particular flower for a while and you have cultivated your attention, it becomes something enormously precious, enormously valuable. So, but here is the word as one word, you know, I think the finest translators worked on the fairy tales of Hesse. But, you know, there's a word, for example, presentiment, which is in German Ahnung, H-N-U-N-G. And an Ahnung is kind of a knowing before it emerges out into its manifestation, where it is visible and can be given a name, sort of the Tao that real is not, cannot be named in that tradition. But it also, the word Ahnen, it means the ancestors. So what we're dealing here is invocation, evocation, incantations of a larger framework of what can be brought into presence. Presentiment, Ahnung in German. Even at times during the night, he would dream about the chalice of the flower and see it enormously open in the front of him, like the gate of a heavenly palace. And he would enter riding on a horse or flying on swans, and the entire world would ride and fly and glide gently with him, drawn by magic down into the glorious abyss where every expectation had to be fulfilled and each presentiment had become true. Well, I leave that last paragraph for the Freudians to interpret as sexual symbols. So, a word about a painting by Vincent van Gogh. This is just another word to turn a plant into a miracle. In 1889, he painted that iris that you can buy reproductions from umbrellas to underwear. On the internet, you find over 120 ways to wear this flower of Van Gogh. And it did sell in 1987 for $53.9 million and is now in the Getty Museum in Los Angeles. So he painted that iris flower while he was in a sanatorium, and he was not allowed to leave for a month. And he saw the irises from his window. Actually, Claude Monet also painted irises. There is a whole symbolism, a history of symbol that goes back into Greek mythology and Greek goddess. Science has also had use for the iris. The British statistician Ronald Fisher in 1936, he came up with the linear discriminant analysis used as a test in statistical classification techniques in machine learning and supporting vector machines. You see, so many things you can do with that flower. Yeah, now, you can use a flower like the iris as a way to work on your own process of turning every object into a subject. There's a wonderful, very brief poem by Joseph von Eichendorff, 1788 until 1857, and romantic. Oh, a romantic. Do I dare to say that? Yes, I do. So it's called, and this one I have to give you in German and in English. And it says, es schläft ein Lied in allen Dingen. There is a sleep in everything, a song. There's a song that is asleep in everything that you observe and think you see it, identify, classify, categorize it according to its usefulness. But there sleeps a song. And the German continues, after es schläft ein Lied in allen Dingen, die da träumen fort und fort. Those things that keep on dreaming. They're in the realm of dream. They're in another reality. Die da träumen fort und fort. They keep on dreaming. Und die Welt hebt an zu singen. And the world rises into songs. The world lifts into song. Die Welt hebt an zu singen. Triffst du nur das Zauberwort? If you only invoke, are able to strike the magic word. The magic word. And that's what fairy tales are about. Magic words, symbols that exchange their lives with the practical life of what is in a normal, ordinary modern times an observer. But actually, there's the work here of Georg Kühlewind that should I mention here, From Normal to Healthy, Hungarian philosopher who was a friend of mine, that and also in Rudolf Steiner, there are a lot of concentration exercises where you actually look at somebody until it starts speaking back, which actually there's no it left. And there's not necessarily an I left in that moment. There is a coming together in the original word of the meaning of the word, symbol, symboline in Greek. So of course our ensemble, our little ensemble, leaves that world, that childish word, and that world is so important for Hesse. he cultivated and focused very much on that this in a stage of maturity, this wonder, this perception of the world as wonder, as a tremendous gift that you then let approach you in unlimited gratefulness, Brother David Steindl-Rast, and then that's called maturity, genuine maturity. So, as quote from Iris, this hero anthem, Hesse says, runs joyfully in the green garden during the spring of his childhood. He enters the mysterious path into the inner depth that runs between the beautiful dream trees. There's a connectedness that runs between all living beings. And you have a choice whether you turn them into things or whether you turn them into companions. So, but soon, of course, you know, Anselm goes to school and has to get his rational, analytical mind grown by his teachers. He rushes impetuously into life. The world of symbols was blown away and forgotten. He no longer reads stories in the colorful veins of the stones and leaves. He no longer saw God and eternity dwelling in the mysterious blossoms of the blue iris. But he went to high school and college and bought blue iris underpants for 1995 because they were on sale and they were 20% off. The last sentence I take responsibility for. But you know, he was not happy as a professor, even though he applied the literary theories of Derrida, Foucault, and Gadamer to the Irish fairy tale, and not even a rigorous deconstructivist analysis for satisfied answer. Hesse says, his soul had taken the long, hard detour, and the old joys were vanquished and withered. But at the end, the long journey ends at the gate of the spirits, it says in the fairy tale. When Anselm sinks, as it says in the fairy tale, into the mystery that lies behind all images. So he kind of experiences the true MAGA movement, the MAGA movement. It stands for making arrogance grateful again. Making A, arrogance, G, grateful again. Or maybe also I hear about a Maha movement, where, you know, Maha has a meaning, Mahatma Gandhi, is making appearances humble again, making the world of appearances again humble in light of the world of symbols. And the end of Anselm's life, Hesse says then, his soul looked through the gate where appearance becomes an enigma and seeing becomes presentiment. And then everything fluctuated, was always there and always gone, disappeared and reappeared in its season. It was as if everything had been there all the time, always equally desired. Well, I see that in what we call linear time, which is what we are at the moment, since we leave the fairy tale world again, bound by. We are actually at the end of this 60 minutes that I was given to talk about these two fairy tales of the dwarf and Iris by Hermann Hesse. So there may be questions, comments, corrections, and let's see. I can continue. Actually, I used about, I spent now about 3 months since I was invited to give these two talks. I spent about, 1/3 of my notes. So there is a rich, incredible rich tapestry of meaning in these tales. But the most important thing is that we don't overlook that they need to be told. This is where you get the gold that does not get old.
Beautiful, Ludwig. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful presentation. Mythopoetic, I would say. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I hope our students have questions. If you want to ask a question, I'm just getting you participants, just raise your hands and I'll call on you. But let me just start, Ludwig, with the ask for your comment about this relationship between prose and song. I was just very struck, Pythagoras, as you know, coined the term cosmos because he said the whole universe is an ornament, it's a song. We're all participating in a great cosmic song. And oftentimes we separate prose and poetry and the literal and the symbolic as separate things. But I think what I'm learning from your remarks today is that fairy tales have their potency because they actually combine the two together in a way that becomes numinous. And I hadn't really thought about it in that way before, but I think there's a lot to consider in the relationship between prose and poetry and literalness and the symbolic. And that's the genius of the fairy tale.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think you absolutely speak to the center here. And we can cultivate, we can make the world, that cosmic world, as something that dwells within us. And the method, which goes beyond analytical thinking, is that we cultivate our associative mind, that we cultivate the world of analogy. And I looked up, actually, which I found very interesting, the difference between, I looked at my Rodale, that is one of my most important big red books. When you look at synonyms of analogy, and that is what Hesse works with here, the iris. He makes the analogies between his inner world and between that which in a normal consciousness becomes the outer as the object analogy. And I give you the 12 synonyms: comparison, parallelism, likeness, resemblance, affinity, kinship, relation, similarity, connection, coincidences, synchronicity, you could say, concurrence, correspondence, co-equality, equivalence, and mutuality. Now, you're going to really see what we're talking with the option of which world do you want to use exclusively. Of course, in reality, I think it's important that we reach as a society again as a level of an ecological balance between that heart mind and that analytical mind.
Yeah,
Analysis, the synonyms are dissection, breakdown, reduction, partition, disassociation, subdivision, disintegration, decomposition, inquisitor, fact sifter, criticism, investigation, explication, interpretation, and especially separation. So what we've done really, as we have invalidated the dimensions, because basically what the modern rational mind desperately invalidates is the connection between the spiritual dimension
exactly,
and also between the natural dimension, because the natural doesn't have a life. It only is useful when you cut the tree in how many square feet of lumber you get. So this is, of course, the ascent of power of a colonial mindset that has reached now its maximum and is becoming self-destructive. And now it's trying to export its own possibility to acquire control over the assumed world of objects through that what I call the rule of arrogant ignorance, AI, or airborne Icarus. But Icarus doesn't know that he is a silicon artist who is actually lacking even the attempt of connecting the different dimensions that are part. They are not even part in the sense of a segment, that are the integrated life experience of a human being and of every other animal and every other plant. Because that dog in the dwarf is much more than a dog, and Filippo is not just one of those servants that is oppressed. So we lack that, and it's careful is not the right word, but it is people are prevented in their relational thinking by a literalism that presents itself as an exclusive factualism. And that's just a tremendously reducing approach to how we can perceive reality. And all of this, now we live in a world of acronyms and of abbreviations. And what's to be prevented from people as we get more and more sucked into these quantum maniac fantasies of the ultimate data, the ultimate
quantum maniac fantasies, everyone. That's what we're caught in.
those data trillionaires that become money Bitcoin billionaires. The foundation is missing. These words have no roots. These words have no sky. Yeah. That they're using when they come out of the machine. And then that's why people are then so hungry for more and more and more. Exactly. I mean, this thing has already been clearly seen by René Guénon 100 years ago in The Reign of Quantities. This has been seen, Ubiquity University definitely needs to deal with Jacques Ellul, the technological society, the technological bluff, and Oxford's philosopher, Jeremy Nadler, the In the Shadow of the Machine. Right now, Margaret Atwood just recently said, this is actually data scraping. AI is a data scraper. Rian Eisler, whom I know actually, as a friend of mine, she said, is this really a tool? Yes, it's the tool of the tool fool. And, now just Yuval Noah Harari, I think he was quite a clear mind, has written that book Nexus, and he says we are really producing, not creating, but producing an agent. This is not sort of a neutral instrument. Abraham Maslow said
Just finished reading it.
Said that
Okay.
60 years ago.
Yeah.
Once you have a hammer, you will find many nails. There is an intentionality, an absolutely insatiable sick mind that is pursuing that kind of collection of sensory deprived and sensory reduced language, because the more a language is depersonalized and the more it is artificially transmitted, the more you have a reduction of meaning, and this is a crisis of meaning.
Yeah, Ludwig, let's get some of these questions. I got one from Michelle Dupree and then Tally Rhodes. Michelle, why don't you pose your question?
Hi. Well, first of all, this has been such a wonderful presentation, Ludwig. I've learned so much about it. And fairy tales are one of the first things that really called to my attention as a child. And I really appreciated how you were saying, fairy tales stick. Why do fairy tales stick? I've never thought of it like that, but I've certainly experienced it like that. As a child, I didn't have a lot of adult communications. And so fairy tales, actually in the form of like Peabody and Sherman, and then, as I get older, I get to read what is a real fairy tale. But if you've ever looked at fractured fairy tales, they make you think. They make you think abstractly. They make you, look at the world as symbolic. And then, as I got older and I started reading, different types of fairy tales, it spoke to me in a way nothing else was speaking to me. And so I really have always loved fairy tales. And when I saw that this was a part of this curriculum, it's why I chose this year's curriculum, is because I wanted to, Siddhartha is one of the first introductions I had to Hesse. And it was profound for me. So I'm curious what you think of, and you may have already been alluding to this really, what we create today as fairy tales. Are we being altruistic? Has that gotten corrupted? It seems to me like I don't, the Disney fairy tales are just not a real fairy tale to me. Somewhere they're just not quite right, the Disney version. If you get back to Grimm fairy tales and certainly Hesse's fairy tales, they invoke more of a self-transformation. I don't find that necessarily in a lot of it today in sort of our newer versions. And I'm just curious what you think, we're coming to with, like, what is fairy tale today?
Well, it's a major distinction, I think, that we have to make, which is completely blurred or obscured in these kind of very popular movies, is a person's worldview is formed very, very early through an education of the imagination. And in the popular so-called fairy tale movies that are based on fairy tales, it's not an empowering process, but it's basically gearing those visual images to satisfy something in a person's ego that runs across the axis of fear and desire. And it's actually the production of illusions. And the person is not walking out of that dark room with a sense of what he or she is now taking from that story as an empowerment. But it's kind of a form of of story abuse. It's just, it has the blockbuster, and it has certain very specific techniques. One of the things in the movies is that the images that come so fast at a speed at you, and the dramatic incidences, the artificial dramatization that you need in a movie, because the screen itself is a boring medium. I dealt a lot with movie scripts because of my wife, Gabriella Martinelli, who did, Romeo and Juliet as a film, and was a film producer for 40 years. What's happening there is that you are prevented from reflecting on the story because the images hit you at such a speed and basically insult or scare your eyes so fast that it's not a process of absorbing. It's a little bit sort of what's served there is fast food for the eyes. And it's just as nourishing as the junk food that is served.
That's a good point.
It's a wonder that the movies are processed food.
Yeah, well, you do get some accounts.
It's fast visual food.
Yeah.
It lacks the vitamin S, which is symbol, which is one of the most important. And it lacks the vitamin F, which is a fairy tale. And vitamin M, very important, metaphor. And the time to really able to absorb it. So,
well, what about Ludwig? What about just to build on Michelle's question for a moment? What about Lord of the Rings or Star Wars, where you have?
Yeah, Star Wars is the Grail story with mythology, and I did know Joseph Campbell, and spent a number of times with him actually at Esalen and elsewhere, and he was a consultant for that. Now that is an attempt that I think they were and they are what I would call responsible filmmaker who are dedicated to reenact a myth or fairy tale on a visual level.
Yeah.
But they are usually don't very successful in the mass market, because the mass market that hits the people with the more dramatic way or drastic way, that's more, that's the fast food. It requires hardly any mental digestion. So I would say that the Lord of the Ring, watch the movie, but it's very important that you tell the story, read the story, and read it again and again, and absorb the story not only through the visual medium. I talked in the last session about the disadvantage of a oral culture and oral at AURAL culture moving to a visual culture. There's much lost, because the ear is a much more distinguishing and more profound and more spiritual organ than the eye. Now that's another big topic, but as you know, it is not impossible. And I'm not saying that all films are irresponsible and are sort of an extremely reduced way of telling a story. However, as what is on the market this day is just the equivalent. It's not biodynamically organic grown fairy tales and symbols. It is fast food for the eyes. And I do think that if you want to be successful on the worldwide market, then I think there are what I would call devices, technological ways of irritating the eye fast enough and hit it with fast enough images. So the actual meaning of the story is content gets converted into a fascination with form. Mm. And that is definitely a tremendous loss.
And it doesn't stick.
Yeah.
And then you're just needing more of it. I think this is why I really feel like if we don't become a more conscious society, technology will overrun us and we'll just become these mechanistic sort of drone type beings. But if we can come into technology with consciousness, maybe we can reserve some of the metaphor and the symbolism and understand the importance of it and kind of change that. But
let's,
Yeah,
Hallie, why don't you interject your question here, and then Ludwig can comment on both of them.
Sure, it's a pleasure to have you here, Ludwig. A beautiful presentation and so many insights. I've got pages and pages of notes. So I have a comment which is about the dwarf, and then I'm going to start with what you said, which I found really intriguing. You spoke about fairy tales being, I guess, metaphors for human advancement. And the quote was codes of self-interest of large groups within the human population. In today's world, I feel like we're moved into a hybrid reality. And although many of my academic friends speak of this death of the living word, these codes of self-interest of larger groups are shifting rapidly. In your estimation of your wisdom from Hermann Hesse, do you have any comments about how the world is changing and how the wisdom that you have expressed with Hesse might find translation into the reality that we're all living in? Because it's not changing, little young people are not going to go back to our ways.
yes. Well, I think the whole life of Hesse, the way he lived it, and all of his writings can be characterized as an attempt to strengthen the inner authority, the inner authenticity of a person against the onslaught of external manipulation attempts. And that is very different from a individualism that leads people down the road towards narcissism and a certain kind of a greed and self-importance. It is actually that a person finds that inner source, cultivates the relatedness, but it is an independence from manipulation, external manipulation, which is usually done in the interest of someone else for their power or profit. So I think he succeeds in his novels as warning tools, as ways of focusing in all the processes of where he develops his plots, where there is the possibility, and it will remain, of an authentic inner response that is based on an inner soul authority, and that is in constant and continuous contact with spirit, and that means with the cosmic story and with the story as it is told to us through our senses of the relatedness in nature among its different living beings, and is it relate to us. So I think that's his main concern, and that's why I think it's justified what the great critic Theodore Tsiolkovsky said, and I mentioned him in the last session, and that is the collection of letters that Tsiolkovsky translated is entitled "Soul of an Age," and that was how Hesse became the guru of the 1960s, because I think there were young people that realized that in this post-World War II fascination with consumerism and technology, there was something lost, a quality of the heart of the soul. Something was being disconnected. And then you have all the, on the one hand, the back to nature movement, and then you have also the artificial connection that is attempted with the inner cosmos through, well, blow up your mind with LSD, which will give you access to that larger realm. But that again is an external artificially induced, because you can get sky high and earth connected and earth blissed just by looking at this iris for
I agree.
an hour every day. Because then after that, every other plant and maybe every other dog and every other everything else you see is not a thing anymore, because you hear the song that is asleep.
Yes, it's a contemplative companion. I listened to O'Donoghue's version of The Dwarf. I think that was the fellow's name. And as I was walking through the park with my Rottweiler, who adores being out in nature, I could see his stories as if each track was the imagination of an individual. This is towards the beginning of the audio recording, where he's entrancing the princess. So it was really neat, because I took you seriously when you said a script of this story could make billions. I'm like, well, I disagree. There's no way. But when I visualized each person being able to craft that narrative in a way that only their imagination would most follow, I was just very excited. I can't describe it exactly, but it was like your description of the flower being a whole world of stories and symbols and characters, and yeah, maybe I'll write about that. It was intriguing.
And we can, and this is not a going back at all. We can again transform this image nation that we are now into a society that is able in education and in public life to place an emphasis again on ways through narrative, through stories, to cultivate the imagination, one word, not two words. Because the limitations of the image nations, I think they have and about to reach their destructive maximum.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, Ludwig, thank you so much. And Tally and Michelle, thank you for your very profound questions. This has been a delicious way to end 2024 with a tonality that it's in the interior authenticity that we really find true grace and abundance and peace. It's not in the external world. And as someone who comes out of the 60s, I can remember I devoured Hermann Hesse. And it put me back in touch with who I really was in my deepest self. So, I mean, I love this session, Ludwig, very, very much. But I made a note. I'd like to get you back to maybe do a lecture on this difference between oral, AURAL, and visual. Because in our culture, we make visual learning and anything visual the most important, and the oral is not forgotten, but we kind of ignore it. And you're challenging that, and I think that's a whole separate lecture sometime. Maybe we could do it on Humanity Rising, but I think that's a very fertile area of reflection.
I base my thinking here on the work of Joachim Ernst Behrendt and his work, The Third Ear, as the ear as the more spiritual and more precise sensory organ. And he was a friend of mine before he passed away. And then also Walter Ong, the Jesuit priest, in his work Orality from morality to literacy. I think this is, as you pointed out, Jim, this is something that is of extreme importance, because then we would look at artificial intelligence very differently.
Yeah.
The importance of the personal, direct, as Walter Benjamin said, the direct transmission of knowledge through the living word, person to person, as Walter Benjamin said 90 years ago.
Yeah. And by the way, I just have to read this one thing, just synchronicity. It just came through from a friend of mine. It was a quote from Joseph Sobran, that in 100 years, we have gone from teaching Latin and Greek in high school to teaching remedial English in college. And that really summarizes, I think, your critique of our age and your question, Michelle and Tally. You know, our world is just becoming a desert in terms of cultural richness from what it was.
Right.
But in our ignorant arrogance, as you put it, Ludwig, so powerfully today, we think we don't need that anymore.
That's right.
Who needs Hesse? Who needs Latin? Who needs Greek? Who needs the myths? Because we're modern.
And who needs handwriting?
We've got AI. And therein lies our predicament.
We're so advanced.
Yeah.
In which direction, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Our advancement has been an impoverishment.
That's right. And it couldn't have been said in a better way. Yes. That's what it is.
Yeah. So you have been like water in the desert the last 2 sessions, my friend, and I want to thank you. We've gotten several emails saying that people were just totally nourished by your remarks. You're a deeply wise man, and I just want to thank you for that and acknowledge your sagacity and appreciate you being with us.
It is a great honor and a pleasure to speak in the context of the programs of Ubiquity University.
Thank you, my friend. And that'll do it for us for today, everyone. Have a wonderful holiday. We'll see you in the new year. Despite its shortcomings, it's a wonderful, wonderful world.
Absolutely.
Pick a time in history. This is probably the greatest, most exciting, potentiated, crisis-ridden moment in the history of our species. So the impoverishment is true, and the aliveness of who we are is also true, and that's the elixir that we find ourselves in. And then we find these pearls of great price, like Ludwig, to guide us on our way. Bye, everyone. See you next year.
Thank you so much.
Thank
All
you.
the best.